What's up, everyone? Welcome back to part 3 of our 5-part series for this tiger tattoo tutorial. First of all, I'd like to thank you for watching this video, and later on I'll be sharing 7 tips on how to apply the white ink on the lower chin, on the lips, on the teeth, on the whiskers, on the eyes, and in other areas. I'll also be sharing a little bit of technical information, some things that I've learned based on my experience as a professional tattoo artist. Before that, I'd just like to give a quick disclaimer. So this video is primarily for beginners or those who want to expand their knowledge in tattooing. What I'm sharing here is based on my own personal experience, and this is in no way teaching you how to become a tattoo artist, okay? Because that's a totally different topic. All right, so I just want to make it clear. This tattoo was done in 2 sessions. So for the first sessions, those were covered by part 1 and part 2. I'll be putting a link on the description below for part 1 and part 2. You'd see that at the start of this video, although the tattoo is not yet finished, I have already applied white highlights on the tiger tattoo because this is already towards the end of the first session. And during this time, my client wasn't sure when he'll be able to come back. That's because of his very busy work schedule. Having said that, I have decided to apply the white highlights. On the mid part, you'll be able to see the start of the second session, which is mostly the crown and details on the upper part of the tiger tattoo. So for tip number 1, before applying white ink on the skin, make sure that the skin is clean and that you have washed the black ink on the surface of the skin. Doing this will ensure that your highlight will be as white as possible. Okay, for tip number 2, know your white ink. What I mean by that is know which white ink to use for doing highlights and know which ones to use for mixing. So in this case, since we are doing highlights for this tiger tattoo, for me, the best ink to use is the one which has the highest opacity. I would not be able to name which brand of ink to use because I don't know, I might be flagged by YouTube or whatever. But as I've said, know your ink. So the more opaque the white ink is, the better it will stay on the skin. So for tip number 3, choose the right voltage. When doing highlights in general, I think it is necessary to use a slightly lower voltage. And you might be wondering why I said that. That's because if we go back to tip number 2, as I've mentioned earlier, when using highlights, you must use the most opaque ink. So if you are using an opaque ink and your voltage is high, or if your machine is running at a high speed, you will not be able to make the ink stay on the skin. Whereas if you're using a low voltage or a low speed on your machine, the opaque ink, there'd be a higher chance for you to make that ink stay on the skin. Tip number 4, always stay within the upper layer of the skin. I've heard people say that when putting white, you need to go as deep as you can. And I totally disagree with that, because to make the ink stay on the skin and to make it look vibrant, you need to stay within the upper layer of the skin, which is the epidermis. And if you go beyond the epidermis, the ink will just blot and eventually fade away. Also, you'll be putting a scar on the skin, which eventually will leave marks. So, in my opinion, yes, you can go deep, but just stay within the epidermis layer. And the best way for you to gauge how thick the epidermis is, it is 1/16 of an inch. That is about the thickness of a matchstick. That's how deep you can go. Anywhere deeper for me would do no good. Tip number 5. So if you've watched my previous videos, part 1 and part 2 of this tattoo tutorial, this is what I have always been repeating, and it works the same when doing when putting highlights on the tattoo. So you start from the bottom, you start from the lower hair, and then move up to the lips, and then the teeth, and then so on and so forth. This will make sure that you don't skip or you don't miss a spot when putting highlights. Okay, so for tip number 6, always put highlights on the lower hair, the lips, the teeth, lower chin, upper chin, whiskers, and the eyes. In part 1 and part 2 of this tattoo tutorial, if you have watched closely, you'd notice that these areas were left blank or with minimal shade. And that's done with a purpose, so that when I put the highlights, the white ink would look much brighter, and at the same time, the skin would be able to take in as much white ink as it can. So on this part, I have already finished doing the highlights, and this is the second session for the tiger tattoo. So it's been like 2 or 3 days after I've put on the highlights. So I'm doing the crown of the tiger. Here now with tip number 7. Always customize. If you can put in your creative touch, then that would make the tattoo look nicer. Alright guys, again, thank you so much for watching this video. And please don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy the rest of the video. See you in part 4 of this tattoo tutorial.